And thank you for joining us today. I think we will get started right on time, but there are a few seats up front if anybody would like to take a seat. My name is Kate Carey, and I have the privilege of working for the Property Casualty Insurers Association, representing our 1,000-member companies on Capitol Hill. And on behalf of my PCI colleagues and our member companies, thank you for joining us today for a timely opportunity to learn from experts as they discuss the many issues that policymakers and the public will grapple with as self-driving vehicles become a reality in our lifetime. Certainly, the development of self-driving vehicles and assisted driving technology has the potential to make a quantum leap in road safety and broader access to transportation. At the same time, there are significant issues ahead and important decisions to be made regarding the regulatory framework for these vehicles. Today, we have representatives of key stakeholders who are involved in these discussions so that they can highlight for us and explain the important issues at play. And following their presentations, we'll have an opportunity for questions and brilliant answers, I am sure. Let us open with comments from Nat Buse of the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, who we are so pleased his travel plans changed, enabling him to be here, but he is not on our invitation and signage due to the late changing of events. So wanted to apologies for that and shout out for you making it here today, Nat, and thank you so much. As I mentioned, Nat works at NHTSA. He is the Associate Administrator for Vehicle Safety Research. In this role, he is responsible for NHTSA's vehicle safety research activities, which are focused on achieving the agency's mission of reducing fatalities and injuries caused by motor vehicle crashes. This includes developing and conducting research on vehicle automation, cybersecurity, vehicle connectivity, and vehicle crash safety. Results of the research program support federal motor vehicle safety standards, consumer information programs, guidelines, and advance the state-of-the-art on a wide variety of vehicle programs. He is also responsible for the Vehicle Research and Test Center, and prior to this role, Nat worked as the Office Director for Crash Avoidance Rulemaking. He has published and presented several technical papers dealing with occupant safety, consumer information, and vehicle design. So without further ado, thank you again, Nat, for joining us today.
Sure, and thank you for that kind introduction. And I, too, am very happy that my travel plans changed because I would have been on a 14-plus hour flight to somewhere on Saturday instead of enjoying the last nice day we probably will have for a long time, at least for a few months. So I thought what I would do is maybe just give a broad brush, we'll call it example maybe, or maybe just a broad brush kind of presentation on just really what's facing NHTSA right now. So as Kate mentioned, I run the research office, and research is always involved in technology. So we're always kind of looking down the road. And when you look down the road and you see what manufacturers are promising the public, it's really exciting, right? These vehicles that can supposedly drive us everywhere, anytime we want, catch up on your favorite Netflix or whatever show. But it's not tomorrow. That doesn't mean we don't have to work on it now. And so one of the things that my office is actually working on is the current technologies that are here, like automatic emergency braking, lane departure warning, some of the technologies that you can actually go get at a dealership today. And we're trying to assess whether those technologies even work, right? So we develop test procedures and performance criteria to sort of measure a level of goodness. What's exciting, though, is people are starting to combine those very single-function technologies to sort of bring us this future. And when you start combining them, the challenges become different. And so one of the challenges is how do you actually test and assess such a vehicle, right? Right now, we do very singular tests, very specific conditions, usually honed in from the crash data. But now we're talking about systems that might not get in a conflict situation, and it's really about everyday driving. And so how do you test that? How do you assess the vehicle's performance in that state? And the other interesting thing is, unlike the technologies today where hopefully you don't experience it all the time, because if you are, you should probably take a look at your driving style. But they're sort of in the background. They're sort of crash prevention type technologies. And where we're heading is technologies that you, the driver, will interact with more and more and more. And so what this brings about is this issue called human factors. And so really trying to figure out, number one, does the driver even understand what the system is doing? But in an event that the system needs to give control back to the driver, is the driver even ready to take back that control? So we're looking at research across those two very different fronts. And then the sort of future state, right? We're not waiting. States are busy. Congress is busy. And so what we've done in the interim is put something out called Voluntary Guidance. And this just got released in September. And what that Voluntary Guidance does is set a framework for where entities who are out there testing and deploying L3, what's called L3, L4, L5 systems. These are systems where the driver is doing less and less of the driving tasks, so that we could have a conversation on safety and a framework for safety. And so what we've done is constructed 12 safety elements based on input from our own research program, from conversations with colleagues across the globe, even manufacturers and Transportation Research Board, among many, many others. And basically, these 12 safety elements represent what people who are really designing these vehicles with safety in mind, the systems, I should say, are really thinking about. So it's, does the vehicle stay within its design domain? So if it's only been tested and validated in the city and it finds itself on the highway, does it even activate? Or if it does, what happens in that scenario? All the way down to things like cybersecurity, right? We need to have the vehicles be secure, and on and on and on and on. And what we've done with this framework is allowed for entities to explain to all of us how they're addressing safety in each one of those elements. Not so much telling them do it this way, but really have them have the creativity and innovation to tell all of us what they're doing, as opposed to just saying, you know, I drove 5 million miles today and I didn't have a crash. And so that process has actually started. And actually, just a few short weeks ago, Waymo became the first entity to actually make available its self-assessment, basically a version of what we had called it, but they call it a safety report, and it's available on their website. And you can see in 40-plus pages how they've addressed safety in real concrete terms, but also how they're starting to talk about it and explain it to consumers. There was another piece of that which had to do with the states, and right, so just so everyone's clear, like right now there are no federal regulations standing in the way of anybody putting a self-driving vehicle on the road. What the situation is when you do that and companies want to take advantage of the cockpit now and do interesting things, that's when there starts to be a conflict. And so what we've done in working with the states is to try to say, look, there are no federal barriers, but probably we should be cautious about putting up state barriers as well. And so we put out some voluntary guidance for states, both at the legislature level, but also what I would call the practitioners, the DMV level. So folks that were getting stuck with legislation being passed down to them and saying, okay, now we got to register these vehicles and we got to worry about insurance, et cetera. And already we see states looking at this and modifying their approach to adopt it. So California was one that was really out in front, really taking an interesting approach, and based on the interactions that they had with us, based on public comments they received, and even based on our latest guidance, they actually have changed quite a bit to make it a more adaptable framework for the entities testing in that state. And so the last part I'll leave you with is, it's not just about guidance, right? We have very strong enforcement authority. We don't need, tons of crashes or anything to act, so no one needs to get scared. Companies know that they have to design vehicles free of unreasonable risk. And so in this interim, while we're developing the knowledge and the expertise and the data to decide what we want to regulate, we will rely on the guidance, our enforcement authority, and the continuing dialogue that goes as this technology evolves. So hopefully that gave you kind of a broad brush overview of what's going on with AVs and from NHTSA's perspective.
Nat, thank you so much. Before we go to Emery, there are 4 seats up on the front on your left, and 3 up here if anybody is looking for a seat. Don't be shy. Okay, thank you again, Nat. Next, we have Dr. Anne-Marie Lewis. Anne-Marie is Director of Safety and Technology Policy for the Alliance of Auto Manufacturers. Her portfolio includes automated vehicles at the federal and state level. Prior to the Alliance, Emery worked at Booz Allen Hamilton as a technical advisor to the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Early in her career, she was a AAA Science and Technology Congressional Fellow in the Office of Senator Heidi Heitkamp, where she worked on a variety of energy policies. Thank you, Emery, for joining us today.
Thank you, Kate. Let's see. All right. Oh, that doesn't show up. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Lewis, as Kate mentioned. Very happy to be here with you today. For those who aren't too aware with the Auto Alliance, we represent 12 of the major OEMs in the U.S. Our vehicles are over 70% of those on the road today. And I'll give you kind of a brief overview of kind of the trends we're seeing with automated vehicles and end with an overview of kind of the policy landscape. And a lot of this just builds on and ties back to what Nat just covered. So as Nat was mentioning, today you can buy a vehicle that has an advanced driver assist system or an ADAS system. You know these as blind spot monitoring, lane keeping assist, adaptive cruise control, parking assist. So these technologies are currently available, and it's really the evolution of these technologies and the combination of them that's kind of leading to the self-driving vehicles that you hear about in the news. So the 4 trends I'm going to cover is increasing automation and connectivity, new entrants and partnerships in this space, ride sharing and advanced mobility services, which is really important, and the most important, increasing vehicle safety. So the first, increasing automation and connectivity. Vehicle manufacturers are testing highly automated vehicles all over the country, all over the world. And this is necessary to train the AI, artificial intelligence algorithms used on the vehicles. So you need to test in diverse roadways, weather conditions, et cetera, to really get enough data to build out these computer software systems. We're also seeing the vehicles are going to be more connected. You're already seeing this today, Bluetooth and wireless technologies. In the future, we'll have vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle-to-infrastructure. You can optimize the flow of traffic that way, and other vehicle-to-X, vehicle-to-the-cloud, and vehicle-to-other road users, which is important when considering pedestrians. So when will automated vehicles be here? Nat mentioned not tomorrow, but relatively soon. I want to mention the SAE levels of automation, and I don't want to get into too in the weeds in this, but if you're interested in the topic, you should go look up this standard. It's SAE J3016, and it's free to download. Basically provides a really nice terminology for all the words that we're using today to talk about automated vehicles. So SAE is defined levels 0 through 5 of automation. Level 0 is no automation. Level 5 is the opposite. Level 1 and 2 have those ADAS systems that you can buy today. Level 3 through 5 is referred to as highly automated vehicles. 3, you need a human to be able to perform the fallback or be able to take over in certain conditions. Level 4 and 5, you do not need a human to provide that function. Level 4 is constrained to a specific operational design domain, which could be a geofenced area. So think of like a campus shuttle or an airport shuttle. Level 5 has no constraints like that. So level 3 and 4 is manufacturers have announced they'll be here in the next 1 to 5 years. Level 5 is a bit further out. And when you think about the fact that vehicles on the road typically turn over, the lifetime of a vehicle on the road is about 12 years, it's going to be at least till 2055 that we see highly automated vehicles everywhere. So we're going to have to share the road for a while. So new entrants and partnerships. This space is evolving very rapidly. It seems like every time I look at the news, there's a new partnership that's been announced. And just last week, I was at an AV regulation conference in Michigan, and a company called Nutonomy, which is an MIT spinoff, was scheduled to speak. They had to cancel, and then we heard later in the day that they had been acquired by Delphi, a tier 1 supplier. So, it's a very exciting time for the industry and lots of new interesting business partnerships. we have someone from Uber here, Patrick, today. So our companies, let's see, I have to look at the list because they're always changing. So we have GM, Volvo, Daimler, probably others partnering with Uber, JLR, GM, Ford, partnering with Lyft. Ford actually just announced they would be delivering Domino's pizzas in Michigan with their highly automated vehicles, but with a person in the car. And Waymo is a spin out from Google, and Nat mentioned, and they're partnered with FCA to test the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid minivans in Phoenix. So we're seeing a lot of partnerships, and it's a very dynamic time, to say the least. The third trend, ride sharing and advanced mobility services. So I just touched on this a little bit with the new partnerships, but the point I want to make here is that it's highly likely that in the U.S. we'll see highly automated vehicles first be deployed largely in a ride-sharing model. This is probably unique to the U.S., but this is attractive due to financial and technology advantages. If you're operating in a specific operational design domain, a specific area, you can really build out your mapping technology very, very well for that area. And as a first step, really have a consumer base there that you're working with and can ensure a return on investment. So increased vehicle safety. This is the most important trend, as I mentioned. In 2016, over 37,000 fatalities occurred in the U.S. due to traffic crashes. And we know that 94% of accidents in the U.S. are caused by human error. So by taking a human at least partially out of the loop, we have a tremendous potential to increase the safety on our roadways. So last, I just want to end kind of an overview of all the policy activities going on, and a lot of this has been mentioned previously already, and not everything is up on this slide. So first of all, as I'm sure many of you are aware or worked on, the House Self-Drive Act and the Senate START Act, the two AV bills that the Alliance is very appreciative for all your work, and we think these pieces of legislation are really important for reducing barriers and providing some certainty for deploying these technologies. We also are seeing a lot of activity in the states. We've tracked over 70 bills by now. We've seen a lot last week. There may be over 80 now across 30 states regarding automated vehicles. And we're working state by state on many of these, trying to provide advice to the states to be consistent with each other regarding definitions. Also, maintaining the role, maintaining activities that are typically state activities versus the role of federal government, which is outlined very nicely in the FAVP and reiterated very nicely in the Automated Driving Systems 2.0, A Vision for Safety, that came out last month. So, and also consistent with the congressional draft bills, the federal government is in charge of the design, construction, performance of vehicles, whereas states handle things like liability, traffic laws, enforcement, registration, and licensing. So it's important not to confuse these things. Otherwise, we'll end up with a patchwork of solutions across the states, making it difficult for vehicles to be sold and drive across state lines. Another important activity that we've been looking at is the current FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and working with NHTSA and to identify areas that would need more work to not preclude highly automated vehicles, and specifically automated vehicles without conventional controls. So we think this is a really important step, and we're really glad to be working with NHTSA on this. So with that, I think I covered my main points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emery. Next, we'll go to Patrick Lydon, who is Senior Manager of Public Policy at Uber. In this role, he is responsible for Uber's relationship with the United States Congress. With more than 18 years of experience both inside federal government and in the private sector, Patrick brings a broad understanding of the legislative process to Uber's policy priorities. Previously, he served as Chief of Staff for Representatives Mary Fallon and Michael Fitzpatrick, and Patrick also worked for the Committee on Government Reform and Oversight and the Committee on Education and the Workforce. Just prior to joining Uber, Patrick founded a Washington, D.C. government relations firm, and we're looking forward to your comments. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. All that is to say that I've just been here for a long, long time. That's why I have so many jobs. Very happy to be here and to talk to you a little bit about what Uber is doing in self-driving and why. And then I'll run through our federal public policy activity and positions. So thank you all for being here, and I'm sure you're appreciating the free lunch. That's always nice, too. So about 2 years ago, Uber entered the self-driving space when we established our Advanced Technologies Group, or ATG, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Their goal is to make safe self-driving vehicles available to everywhere on our Uber network. Some other things and why we wanted to tackle this that we're working on is we want to reduce fatalities and injuries on our highways. The numbers are going up. They're not going down in terms of injuries and deaths on the road. And that's something that I think we should all be concerned about. We also want to, as I said, provide accessible, affordable transportation to as many people as possible. That's our mission as a ride-sharing company. And then we ultimately want to rethink and reimagine vehicle use and ownership through our combined self-driving fleets with our ride-sharing application. And I guess I always like to take a poll: who has been in a ride-share vehicle? So who's taken ride-share? Good portion. Hopefully some of that's on Uber. That would be nice. How many people have been in an autonomous vehicle so far? Okay. All right. That number is going to grow. We'll make, and Uber wants to help you make it grow. I'll say, so more than a year ago, we began operating on public roads in Pittsburgh and offering rides. So that's what you see with the app. It's an opt-in, actually, and if you are requesting an Uber X in Pittsburgh, you have a chance of that vehicle pulling up. I can assure you people get really excited when that car comes. It's very noticeable. But there is also opt-in. So if you choose not to ride on that, you can choose on the app not to ride in that car. In February, we expanded to Phoenix. So we're offering rides in two areas now. So all this has led to a very exciting milestone for Uber and for others. We've driven successfully 1 million miles and 30,000. We've provided 30,000 self-driving trips. That is both testing and ride share. So it's not just giving rides alone, but it is something that we're very excited about, and that happened in less than a year. So you'll see more milestones, not with just with us, but with other companies that are putting their cars on the road. So we're best known for our ride-sharing app, of course. Why did Uber decide to try to tackle this challenge? As I said, we're really focused on this self-driving technology being an extension of what we're already doing in terms of revolutionizing transportation. I would guess that most likely your first ride in a self-driving vehicle will be in a ride-sharing vehicle. The cost of these cars right now are very expensive, so it's easier to spread the cost over the fleet. And so Uber as a company is working on that. So that, as I said, why are we suited to tackle this challenge? Because of our strong foundation in ride-sharing in our network, that we can integrate the self-driving vehicles in with our regular driving fleet and grow from there. Second, we're a transportation technology company. That's where our expertise lies. And then third, we have some of the world's best minds. In Pittsburgh alone, we have a core group of engineers that are working on these problems every day, and they are the top minds. So that it astounds me when I get to talk to these people and figure out what they're doing. We also have engineers in San Francisco and in Arizona working on these problems along with our products and operations folks. So this is a quick view of our car. So this is what's operating in Pittsburgh and Arizona right now. It's important to remember that that's not our car, that's a Volvo. We are primarily a software company, and we come at this from a software perspective, which is very different from, not very different, but it is different from the OEM experience and what they're doing in terms of actual manufacturing the cars. We're putting our software platform into already existing platforms. We do currently manufacture a small amount of hardware. Once that technology catches up and we can work with other partners to build that out, we will gladly give away our manufacturing piece of our business and focus on the primarily on the software. So what you see there is that array on the top. There's 7 different cameras that are on the vehicle that give us 360 view around the entire vehicle. We have stereo cameras up front that can tell difference, basically can tell distance, just like your eyes would. The most noticeable feature, and probably the most talked about, is the top hat or the bucket, the upside down bucket, or there's a bunch of different names for it. But that's our Lydon, so that's the laser that gives us a 3D 360 scan, and you'll see in a slide that I'll have after what that actual Lydon is seeing on the road when it's driving. And then we have an array of other sensors and radar that keeps our vehicles running safely and efficient. Important piece of this, this is the top radar display and the cameras that are on our truck. It just disappeared, but it's there. So very similar to our technology that we have on our passenger vehicles, our trucks operate in a very similar manner. There it is again. So that's what it looks like when it's rolling down the road. And we operate our trucks right now in San Francisco, and we're hoping to expand very shortly to a few other areas. So I want to run through this really quick so you know how much work it takes to actually deploy in a city like Pittsburgh or to operate in Arizona. All the steps that are listed here are what we do before we put these cars on the road. First, we have to map. So we do extensive mapping and remapping of the areas that we're going to drive, so we know where everything that's stationary on the road is going to be. We know where the buildings are, we know where the road signs are going to be, where the stoplights are, and our cars are looking for that all the time. That helps us with our computing power. Once we have the maps down, we route. So we take what we are learning from our rideshare business and selecting well-traveled routes, and we want to know where we should be operating and where the customers will want to, number one, where they want to be picked up and where they want to go. So that's very important to the program. So we take that and program along those routes and specifically address either local needs or any individual issues. We constantly do simulations and testing to ensure that we're operating at the highest safety levels possible. And we do that simulation not only on tracks, but by computerized simulation. Our engineers really like the computer simulation because they could crash a lot of cars very cheaply doing it that way. It's a lot less fenders being bent when you do it on a computer. And then finally, we do on-road testing and we deploy. The on-road testing is very important because we need to know how our car will operate in extremes. Is there going to be a problem with extreme sun or with heat, or is there going to be problems with the cold? Or what was a problem for us a little while ago was steam coming out of the road. Our cars thought that was a person moving or some object moving, and we would stop. So we need that real world testing, and that's why we've been supportive of the congressional action that's been taking, that we can test and employ in real world scenarios. So Moving on to the legislation, we have been very closely tracking what the House and Senate is doing. I've seen a couple of staffers here that are working on that directly. We appreciate your efforts. The broad categories that we were really looking for in terms of capturing with the legislation were federal preemption, vehicle testing and exemptions, as I said, cyber security and privacy. Particularly on cyber security and privacy, we knew how much Congress was worried about that. Every time you talk to a policymaker, they really start talking about that stuff. We wanted to be able to respond and tell them about what we do internally in terms of our privacy and our cyber regimes. So our Uber legislative priorities really quickly. Number one, federal preemption, by far the top issue. Just as others have said, we don't want the patchwork of different laws at the state and local level. We want our cars to be able to operate beyond state lines. And so that was a very important piece. Parity with OEMs on testing and exemptions. Most of the laws are already written with the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers in mind, because that's who has been manufacturing the cars. So as a software company, we wanted to make sure that we had that same ability to do the testing and to take exemptions. Right now, we work through the OEMs. I think that's how it's going to progress in the future. But if there is a change in business model, we want the most flexibility as possible. And then, of course, we had been asking policymakers to include all vehicles that are in the transportation environment. So every car and truck that's driving on the road, we thought that policymakers should address them all at the same time. So we worked very hard on that issue, I would say. So how do we do? We did pretty good. Federal preemption, we're pretty comfortable with that. We're going to be watching it through the Senate still has to take it to the floor. So we'll be working with Senate staff on that, and we'll be watching it in the conference process once they conference with the House, and those discussions are already starting to happen. Parity with OEMs. Once again, we think we did pretty well on that, and have been pleased to be able to talk to staff about the differences of our what we're doing as a software provider versus what the OEMs are doing. Inclusion of CMVs, we didn't get it, but we'll continue to work on it. And I think that we believe that the federal government will be addressing that as one group. So the administration is going to be taking that up. So we'll be working with them and try to find a process with the Senate in terms of working to include all of the vehicles on the road into the federal legislation. So what is the greatest barrier? We think public perception and acceptance, and if you listen to the hearings and listen to the different policymakers, they're very keyed in on this as well. I think we have a lot of work to do, because right now, based on the polling numbers, that's what the public sees. So there's a lot of young people in here, but that's Christine. That's a car that was demonized, or I guess it came back to life after it was renovated, and so it chased a lot of people around a small town, terrorized a small town in a Stephen King movie. And of course, the most recognizable self-driving truck is the Goblin truck from Maximum Overdrive. Based on the poll numbers, that's basically what people think these things are. Now, what we're trying to sell is Herbie the Love Bug. We're not quite Herbie the Love Bug, but what I would say about these self-driving cars is they drive a lot like what your grandmother would drive like. They do the exact speed limit. If it's 25 miles per hour, they're doing 25. If it goes up to 35, they do 35. They do full 3-second stops at stop signs, which much to the chagrin of the people that are behind them, our vehicle operators tell us that people are already beeping before the car stops at the stop sign. Then it waits for 3 seconds, and then it goes. So that's a long way of saying that we follow the law exactly to what the law is. So they drive in a very safe manner. If there is a red light that is on our system that is covered over with, I've seen this happen, I've been in the car when this happened, a construction zone where they covered over the red light with canvas, and we don't have it in our system. the car knows that that red light is there. It cannot read the signal, so it just stops. Everything is defaulted to stop. If it sees a person, and I was in a car for this too, a person was on their device and it was coming, they were coming to the intersection and stepped off the curb, our car stopped. Because it didn't know that that driver or that pedestrian was going to stop. If you were operating the vehicle, you would know that that guy's just stepping off the curb, but our car stopped. So we're working on that perception and doing as best we can with that by offering rides in different locations and trying to get people in our cars to see and feel it firsthand. So I'll wrap up just by saying I focused on the legislative process, but we're also working closely with NHTSA. Very happy to see Nat here. We're very happy to be working with their process, and we'll be providing comments and their guidance and working with them through the different workshops. I think they've done a great job of trying to increase public awareness as well. And I think the federal government creating stability and certainty in terms of the laws will help us as companies provide that same sense of stability and understanding of self-driving vehicles in the future. So with that.
Thank you, Patrick.
Make sure my system didn't
Next, we have
crash.
Russ Martin, Director of Government Relations for the Governor's Highway Safety Association. In this role, he represents the state highway safety offices before the federal agencies and Congress to assist states as they work to address highway safety issues. Russ also works closely with partner organizations to improve road safety and promote GHSA objectives. Prior to joining GHSA, Russ was manager of state relations at AAA, where he spent over 8 years supporting AAA's network of motor clubs to advocate on behalf of AAA members on traffic safety, vehicle technology, and motorist rights. Thank you, Russ.
Thanks. So my name is Russ Martin, and I'm here, Director of Government Relations for the Governor's Highway Safety Association, or GHSA. We're a nonprofit association of state highway safety offices for all 50 states, D.C., the territories, and Puerto Rico. Every state has a state highway safety office, and their primary role is to oversee the disbursement of federal grants to state and local partners to address highway safety issues related to human behavior. So these are things like impaired driving, seatbelts, distracted driving, anything that has to do with human behavior, and it's typically education and enforcement programs. Our members are, GHSA and our members, we're deeply supportive of autonomous vehicle technology. I'm sure you all are aware that the latest numbers are out. There are about 36,000 people were killed in the last year in traffic crashes. Fatalities have been on the uptick. Our members are on the vanguard of implementing behavioral interventions to address this estimated 94% of crashes that are rooted in poor human choices. And autonomous technology promises to dampen or remove the impact of this human behavior on our roadways. So earlier this year, on February 2nd, the GHSA released a new report called Autonomous Vehicles Meet Human Drivers, Traffic Safety Issues for the States. This report was authored by Dr. James Headland. It's among the first to comprehensively examine the traffic safety implications of automated vehicle technology and its implications for highway safety agencies and safety advocates. And one thing that we found is that we're likely looking at a mix of vehicles on our roads for quite some time, probably decades, a mix of both traditionally operated vehicles and vehicles across the spectrum of automation. And that means we're going to have, first of all, we're still going to have human drivers on the road, and we're probably going to still see persistent challenges and new challenges that stem from population-level human error and human factors. The industry is already cataloging a short history of crashes involving autonomous vehicles, and predictably, human drivers have been the ones at fault. So that should come as no surprise, but it does suggest a couple of things that we need to think about. We probably ought to begin thinking about how we will train human drivers to better interact with AVs in traffic. It raises questions about whether and how we should program AVs to better meet the expectations of the drivers around them, and also seems to be looking at how we should train people to better operate level 2 and level 3 vehicles, where driving responsibility is shared. Surveys suggest the public doesn't fully understand the levels of automation, and there's a tremendous potential for level confusion. But all these challenges are manageable, and just like with traffic crashes today, the vast majority of them are completely preventable. So we can train human drivers to better interact with AVs in traffic. Developers are improving AV technology every day. We can also prepare motorists to safely operate AVs at all levels. The safety community already has a robust infrastructure set up to deliver safety messages to drivers at large, and we look forward to collaborating with government and industry to get drivers ready for this new motoring environment. But GHSA is also thinking deeply about the impact of automation on more traditional traffic safety issues. So the clicker's not working. So thinking about things like occupant protection. So how many people in here always buckle up when they take a ride in a taxi? Show of hands. Most people, that's pretty good, but you probably would not be surprised that in some audiences a few hands go up. And if we're looking at a fleet of mostly shared AVs like robo-taxis, we got to make sure that people continue to buckle up and continue to wear proper child restraints in that environment. States will need to decide where to draw the line on impaired driving. Should AVs be a safe ride home? When can they be a safe ride home, and when should they not? States are going to have to decide where to draw that line in policy. There's a recent news article that suggested AVs will open new opportunities for drinks on the go. Like you can ride on your autonomous vehicle and have a drink. Why not? Because you're not driving. But if that's the case, states and the federal government will have to revisit their laws on open container, because currently in most states you're not allowed to have an open container of alcohol. It almost goes without saying that level 2 and 3 vehicles pose risks of inattention, and states will probably want to change or adjust at least their laws on distracted driving. What about teen drivers? Teens are still some of the most risky drivers on the road today. And how will automation affect the learning to drive process? What are parents and driver education providers, what ought they tell teen drivers about automated system and driver assistance? Should teens be able to learn on autonomous vehicles, or should they have to prove their skills on traditional vehicles? And these are all open questions. Finally, we'd like to see law enforcement more engaged. Police are going to continue to be the folks that are on the front lines of traffic safety, whether it's responding to crashes or stopping dangerous driver behaviors when they encounter it on the roads. And police need to know what to expect when they run into autonomous vehicles out there. California, in its most recent proposed state regulations, considers the use of what they call law enforcement engagement plans. And we think this is a pretty good idea, so we'd like to see more development in that area. But don't get me wrong, all of these are manageable issues. None of these should be roadblocks to AV technology. But it's important for states to start thinking about these issues now and how we can make space for automation in the driving safety environment that we have now. So on the federal level, we're excited to see leadership both on Capitol Hill and with NHTSA. Both Congress and NHTSA are beginning to look at important issues like educating the public, engaging law enforcement, and all the issues surrounding the use of data to investigate crashes and track traffic safety trends. With the legislation that's currently being considered in Congress, GHSA is working with an informal coalition consisting of the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, AASHTO, which is the Association of State DOTs, and AMBA, which are the state DMVs, to speak with a single unified state voice on these issues. And we're all supportive of the paradigm that would apply traditional state and federal roles within the AV context. And we've been meeting with folks on the Hill and the auto industry and other stakeholders. And we want to make sure that when we go to clarify state and federal rules, that we're drawing the lines where they ought to be. We're drawing the lines appropriately. We don't want to inadvertently preempt responsibilities that may rightly belong on the state and local level. At NHTSA, some possibilities for the future. We'd like to see them also expand within their current mandate to address population behavioral safety issues. For example, they can conduct research to document traffic safety issues that might be related to autonomous vehicles, develop model public education materials, traffic safety best practices. They could even support law enforcement with their Enforcement and Justice Services Division. These are all things that NHTSA currently does with traditional traffic safety issues, and we think that there are applications that could be there for autonomous vehicles as well. So just some things to think about. We're very excited to help usher in the safe autonomous future, not only bring positive changes in mobility, but hopefully also save a lot of lives and prevent a lot of injury out there on the road. So here's my contact info, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Russ. It's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Robert Passmore. He's Assistant Vice President with the Property Casualty Insurers Association. And I should mention PCI represents companies selling products across the P&C spectrum, including 43% of the auto insurance market. At PCI, Bob's responsibilities include legislative and regulatory policy development and issue identification for claims, personal automobile, boat, and motorcycle insurance, as well as auto safety issues. Bob serves as a media spokesperson as well as an issue expert for PCI before state and federal policymakers on these issues. Bob joined PCI in January 2007 after almost 22 years with Liberty Mutual. He is a member of the...
Sounds like a really long time.
That sounds like insurance humor or something. Bob is a member of the Society of Chartered Property Casualty Underwriters, which is no laughing matter. Very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming today. Well, when you talk about autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars, it's really something that captures the imagination everybody wants to talk about. Hence the reason why we have this, standing room only crowd here today. Everybody's asking the same kind of questions. When is this going to happen? How is this going to happen? And those are the same questions that auto insurers are asking themselves as they look ahead into what is likely to be some significant disruption in the way that they do business. There have been some that have predicted. There have been some that have predicted that this would be the end of auto insurance. We think those predictions are a little premature. The insurance industry has proven to be very adaptable many times over the years, but there are certainly challenges for auto insurers as to adapt to the changes that increasing automation of vehicles will bring. Okay. Most everyone agrees that in the long term, automated vehicles will mean fewer accidents, but will that be the case in the near term? I'm having trouble with the slides here. Come on. Come on. Come on. Probably aiming at the wrong thing. What should I be aiming at? And voila. Anyway, as automated vehicles share the road with human-driven cars and spend more time on the road as opposed to in parking lots and driveways, will that lead to more accidents in the short term? How do you determine liability where an automated vehicle is involved? It won't just be a matter of apportioning liability between human drivers. Increasingly, there's going to be a products liability component where the vehicle is doing the driving. The new technology also is going to mean opportunities to develop new insurance products for automated vehicles, but you have to know what technology a vehicle has and how it may be different from today's vehicles. Right now, auto insurance pricing is based on the driver, and how does that change when the technology is doing the driving more and more often? Can we click through these again? There we go. There you go. I'm caught up again. All right, see if we can make it to the next slide. For auto insurers to be able to adapt and support automated vehicle innovation, PCI believes that access to data is going to be the key. And that means having the ability to identify vehicles that have AV technology, the level of automation, and the type of system in order to be able to develop products and pricing. When the vehicle or the system is doing the driving, the only way to find out what happened is to have access to the data, the video, the photos from the vehicle, just as you would get a statement from a human driver about what they did or saw. At the same time, protecting vehicle users' privacy, ensuring vehicle systems are secure, and that intellectual property rights of the people who spend a lot of money to develop these systems are also essential. There's a lot of work to be done to figure out the best ways to do all that. And we believe that insurers are an essential stakeholder in that process and have valuable contributions to make on advisory boards and committees that are working on these issues, developing policy. For those reasons, we supported Senator Inhofe's amendment to the AV START Act in the Senate that calls for a regulatory timeout on data access rulemaking and sets up an advisory committee to address data access and sharing issues. The auto insurance industry has always been a leading advocate on auto safety issues. The gentleman to my right here is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, being the most prominent example of the industry's commitment. But it's important to plan for the future, but it's also important not to lose sight on today's auto safety issues, such as distracted driving, alcohol-impaired driving, drug-impaired driving, and now marijuana-impaired driving as more and more states consider legalizing marijuana. There are there are significant challenges ahead and important decisions to be made about appropriate regulatory framework for automated vehicles, but clear expectations of what those guidelines or standards are will be critical, not just for the technology developers, but for public acceptance of the technology. We know that automated vehicles will share the road with human vehicles for the foreseeable future, and it's important that occupants of automated vehicles have the same kind of crash protection as occupants of any other vehicle. Finally, we're pleased that the primacy of states in regulating insurance and liability issues has been recognized in all the guidance from NHTSA, as well as in legislation in both the House and Senate bills. However, we share the concerns raised by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They're our regulators, so if they're concerned, we're concerned, about some of the qualifying language that we look forward to working with members of Congress on addressing that. So with that, I'll thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bob. David Zoobi is Executive Vice President and Chief Research Officer for the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. Working out of the Vehicle Research Center, he oversees and coordinates research by the VRC, the Institute, and the Highway Loss Data Institute. Mr. Zoobi is the author of numerous research papers published by the Institute on topics such as the biomechanics of injury, pedestrian protection, crashworthiness, and crash investigation. Prior to joining the Institute as a research engineer in 1993, Mr. Zoobi worked on research projects for NHTSA at the Transportation Research Center in Ohio. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. Thank you, PCI, for inviting us to participate in this discussion. And thank you to all of you in the room who've given up time from your busy day to come and hear what we have to say. Me and my colleagues believe that automated driving does hold promise to improve highway safety. However, the benefits of automated driving are not guaranteed. It's imperative that the earliest deployments of automated driving be monitored closely to understand the real effects of automated driving on safety, so that the shortcomings may be addressed before technology is widely adopted. Some of you may not have been around, but the earliest airbags were found to sometimes injure and kill people under certain circumstances. Early identification of that problem led to changes in the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards governing airbag design, and those problems are now rare, even with the tens of millions of CATA airbags that are being recalled for problems associated with injuries. I think the prognostication that the substituting computers for human drivers will eliminate the 9 out of 10 crashes caused by human error is overly simplistic, and it's by no means proof of what will really happen when computers replace humans as drivers. As anybody who's ever worked with a computer application well knows, computers frequently fail to do the things they're supposed to do, even when those tasks are far simpler than driving. And I thank my fellow speakers for providing very good examples of relatively simple tasks that we asked the computer at the back of the room to perform, and it failed to do so. Forward collision warning, so this slide, I'm already behind. Yeah, this slide summarizes our attempt 10 years ago at sort of a simplistic analysis to estimate the maximum crash reductions of 4 driver assistance features that were entering the vehicle marketplace and have become more widely available since. These figures assume that every vehicle is equipped with the feature, that every feature is always used by the driver, and that it is completely successful at preventing the types of crashes it's intended to prevent. Under these assumptions, forward collision warning, which mainly addresses imminent front-to-rear crashes, could prevent up to 1.1 million police-reported crashes and maybe as many as save as many as 900 lives. Lane departure warning wouldn't prevent as many crashes, but because many of the crashes it could prevent are severe, it could save more than 7,500 lives. Today, well before these features are commonplace in the United States fleet, we know that not all drivers use them, and even when they do, the systems aren't 100% effective. Since 2011, IHS and Hildy have published numerous analyses comparing the crash rates of vehicles equipped with optional driver assistance features to the rates for the same year, make, model counterparts without those optional features. We've conducted such analyses using both our in-house database of insurance claims as well as a database of police-reported crashes from 22 states that represent about half of the United States population. However, these studies required special cooperation from the automakers. In order to compare the crash rates for vehicles equipped with optional driver assistance features to the rates for the same year, make, model counterparts without those features, we need to know which specific vehicles on the road were equipped with the options and which were not. This information is not encoded in the vehicle identification number, or VIN, but automakers know when they build each vehicle which optional content is on board each vehicle. 8 automakers, whose logos you see pictured here, worked with us to provide data that could be used to construct data tables like the one shown here, where the abbreviations across the top row represent different driver assistance features. When joined with insurance claim data or police report crashes that also have VIN, data like what you see here can be used to construct analyses to measure the real effect on crashes associated with the presence of these features. So what did we find? Oh, skipped over. Oh, these are right. This slide shows the difference in relevant crash rates between vehicles equipped with optional driver assistance features and their counterparts without. Vehicles with forward collision warning have front-to-rear crash rates that are 27% lower than vehicles without it. While 27% is nothing to sneeze at, it's a long way from preventing all front-to-rear crashes. Comparing the warning-only results with those for FCW with auto brake does support the general notion that automation can improve over relying on human drivers to respond to the warnings. The reductions for combination of FCW and AEB are almost twice for those for warning by itself. Lane departure warning is also associated with reductions in rates of relevant crashes, which in this case are those associated with drivers inadvertently straying from their lane. So we're talking about head-on crashes, sideswipe crashes, and single vehicle run-off road crashes. We expect that the reduction shown here could be bigger if every driver left their LDW systems turned on, but separate research indicates that only about half of drivers with LDW in their cars leave it turned on. Reductions in crashes measured by the police reports don't necessarily yield the same reductions in insurance claim rates. This slide shows the difference in claim rates between vehicles equipped with the optional features and those without. The different colors represent different insurance coverage types. In every case, the reductions for the insurance claim rates are smaller than the reductions for relevant crash types, because insurance covers crashes of all configurations. Thus, the reductions that we see for the specific crash types are diluted by all other crashes represented in the insurance data. Even though lane departure warning was associated with reductions in certain crash types, it essentially has no effect on insurance claims. While 2 types of the coverage see increases, the other sees a decrease. None of the changes that we're showing for LDW are statistically significant. The analysis that I've described up to now couldn't have been done without data linking the specific VINs to information about the presence of optional assistance features we wanted to study. The studies were some of the first measuring the real benefit of forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking, and they were critical to convincing 20 automakers to make this combination of features standard starting in September of 2022. I'm sure that everybody here is familiar with the Google Self-Driving Vehicle Development Program, which has subsequently spun off into its own business called Waymo. Early on, Google were conducting most of its R&D in and around their headquarters in Mountain View, California. And because the state of California has regulations in place that require Google and others conducting automated vehicle R&D to support crashes and mileage to DMV, it was possible to compare Google's crash experience with the crash experience for human drivers. 2 groups of researchers compared the Google project human driver crash experience and came to 2 different conclusions. Turns out this is not an easy thing to do for 2 very important reasons. First off, the companies that are testing AVs in California are required to report crashes that wouldn't be reported to police if a human driver had been involved. And meanwhile, those police-reported crashes are our main measure of safety with human drivers. Secondly, the weather and road environment in and around Mountain View is far less varied than the total experience of human drivers. And early on, the Google car wasn't being driven at night or in bad weather. Both Umtree and the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute attempted to deal with these differences in what's known about the Google car with what is known about human drivers. But because they use different ways of accounting for those differences, they come up with different conclusions about how Google program compared to human drivers. We took a third approach. We very simply went through all of the crashes that Google had reported to DMV and sorted them in 2 piles. those that we think would have been reported to police had a human been driving, and those that would not. Then using that first group of crashes, we computed the crash rate for the Google car and compared it to the crash rate for humans in Mountain View, California. Apples to apples comparison. Cars with the computer driving, cars with humans driving in and around the same roads. The Google car is doing pretty well in comparison to drivers in Mountain View, although comparing the tall red bar with the pink and gray one indicates that Mountain View drivers have a higher crash rate than other parts of California or the whole United States of America. In fact, I think this question raises a question for me about whether or not the folks who drive in and around Mountain View, California ought to be the people who are teaching the Google car how to drive. We also compared crash types between the Google program and those reported to Mountain View police. We think this comparison also suggests that Google is on the road to developing an automated driving program that's safer than human beings. Nearly 3/4 of the Google car crashes involved a human-driven car driving into the back of the Google car, whereas that represents a much smaller portion of the crashes reported for human drivers. Also, the absence of single vehicle crashes in the Google car pie is an indication that their vehicles have not been involved in some of the more severe types of crashes that humans are involved in. Again, this type of analysis was only possible because crash reporting requirements in California. Unfortunately, Waymo and others have moved much of the R&D testing to states without reporting requirements, and the availability of data on crashes involving automated vehicles is becoming scarce. Automated driving technology has great potential to improve safety of ground transportation, but its benefits are not guaranteed. It's imperative to have public policy that ensures the availability of types of data needed to conduct studies of AV safety so government independent researchers can help direct the technology's evolution to the safest possible end. This slide summarizes two types of data we think are important to understanding the benefits of automated driving as it's deployed into the U.S. fleet of vehicles. First, we need to keep track of which specific vehicles are equipped with which specific types of technology, and this information needs to be available to government and independent researchers and insurance companies as well. This also applies to the exemptions from photomotor vehicle safety standards that are being contemplated by legislation. We need to be able to analyze whether or not those exemptions were the right exemptions to give in the face of automation. Second, in the case of crashes that involve vehicles with automated driving on board, it will be important that certain information is recorded and recoverable by all entities that need to know. At a minimum, this would include identifying whether the automated driving system or the human driver was driving at the time of the crash. Thanks for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. And I see we are kind of over our time that we took you all away from your offices. So before I ask questions, let me go to the audience first to see if there are any questions that you all would like to ask our panel of experts today. It's a shy crowd. Okay.
You mentioned early on the issue with airbags and how there were a lot of issues early on, and I think that looking back, people have acknowledged that part of the issue with airbags was because they weren't considering women and children, because only men were designing these airbags, so they were forgetting about people that weren't built like them. Do you think that'll be an issue given that the tech industry has such low diversity, and that's certainly a concern? I know that Uber's had to deal with in the past and currently. Do you think that will continue to be an issue when we move into automated vehicles? Is diversity going to become a problem that the tech industry needs to address?
Well, I think that's a hard question to answer. I'm not sure whether the lack of diversity in the tech sector will lead to automated driving that doesn't address the needs of minorities in the U.S. population. Your understanding of the airbags is not entirely correct, because part of the issue there was the standards were trying to protect unbelted people. The consequence was that women and smaller drivers were being injured, but by virtue of trying to protect unbelted people, the airbags needed to have a certain amount of energy to keep them from crashing into the vehicle interior. Under the crash standards which were in place at the time, that amount of energy could injure people if they were too close. So the safety standard had to be revised to adjust the speeds at which things were tested, and also to include testing with smaller occupant dummies to make sure that those forces didn't injure people.
I would guess as the sole tech representative here. I would also say that we are taking into consideration every community. We have engineers, obviously, that are women, but also we're working extensively with communities such as the disabilities community to make sure that when we are rolling this out in different cities, and as we're using our ride-sharing experience, how do we handle people with disabilities? How do we handle different people that enter into the vehicle? So all of that is part of the testing regime, and it's all taken into consideration. And we are using our ride-sharing experience to inform how we do things on the self-driving side. So how are the vehicle controls manufactured and operated, and what are the best ways of creating controls that are useful for everyone that may enter our vehicles. Self-driving is very exciting for a lot of communities that don't have transportation, and we're part of that, and we're very much geared towards and focused on those communities.
Yes.
So with the charts that were shown, there's going to be a mix of human and automated vehicles for the foreseeable future. I was at another conference where someone was talking about this, and he said if 20% of the drivers are slavishly following the rules of the road, speed limits, etc., and 80% are not, the rest of the 80% are not going to be happy. So what does that future look like? Do you worry that sort of having 20% grandmothers on the road, following all the stop signs, how is it going to work in New York City? How's that going to work in DC sometimes? Will there be pushback in those, and will we have to think about standards that aren't something following the rules all the time? I just wonder how that's all going to play out.
I'll start. I would like to say that that question is an important one to consider, and I think that there is a danger that if we get on the slippery slope of letting computers drive like humans, that they're going to make the same mistakes as humans. So it may be aggravating to people for a while that some people are following the rules, but there are human drivers out there that follow the rules, and usually they're not the ones that are at fault in causing crashes. So while there may be some need to take the current level of technology and adjust it somewhat for it to work more smoothly in traffic, the idea that we're going to let computers bend the rules and start driving like humans leaves them at risk of causing the same kinds of problems that human drivers do.
I would just add that there's you refer to this this issue of can we program autonomous vehicles to behave more like humans, and I mean that's one way to look at the issue. This issue is that maybe we ought to, and maybe we can. I mean, we obviously can. I guess the question is, can we do it safely? And it may end up that we as a society may attempt to do that. But on the other hand, think of right now you might get headache if you have to wait behind a car that stopped at a stop sign for 3 seconds. But people used to feel the same way about wearing seatbelts, about drunk driving, and the culture has changed in society. So another way to go about that is to take a deeper look at what are we doing as a society that's causing all these safety problems. Maybe the cost is that we ought to be driving a lot more safely. So
my favorite joke is that there's no dial in the car, like drive aggressively, like let's turn it up to 10 versus 5. It would be a mistake to program these in a way that isn't conforming to the law. But I think our engineers are actually thinking through that, because that is obviously a problem. So our engineering programmers are thinking about those issues and seeing how we can solve for those problems. I would also say, I mentioned this in my slide deck, the people of Pittsburgh have adjusted. I mean, there's a lot of beeps, but they see our cars, they're very visible, they're very recognizable. They know, okay, on this bridge, I'm gonna go 55, but the car is gonna go 35. I'm gonna pass it. So people are starting to adjust to that and know that when they get behind the car, it's gonna do this. So that's part of it, is just the rollout in different areas in the public adoption, is just experiencing this in the car and outside the car.
I think I said, one more question. Yes.
So this question is for Mr. Passmore and anyone else who wants to take it. Just when you're when you're trying to figure out sort of insurance products for these autonomous vehicles, what is that like for the industry when, you don't really have, however many years of claims data and, of autonomous vehicles trying to figure out, what these insurance products are going to look like when you don't have, what are the actuaries going to do with like 1 year of data?
Well, you're right. It's very difficult. The shorter time frame you have, the less confidence you can have in those numbers. But it's important. One of the things I talked about is the ability, and David Zoobi also talked about this, is the ability to be able to identify which vehicles have the technology, so you can start to build that loss history, and you can figure out which technologies, and then even start to be able to differentiate one system versus another, because some will work better than others. And you can figure out which ones do and which ones don't. And that's all, that's the nature of the beast right there, developing that kind of loss history, that loss data.
Have you been sort of having that issue with the sort of minor autonomous systems that have already been rolled out, like the auto braking stuff?
That's an existing problem now. I think what David pointed out, he showed that they were able to do some studies because they got information specifically from the automakers. But in fairness, I think the VIN is sort of all full up in what it can, what can be coded into it at this point. There's all kinds of information that's coded into the vehicle, the VIN, the vehicle identification code. Finding a way to be able to do that. There's a number of safety research you heard from David, and for me you heard about for insurance purposes. There's just a lot of benefits to being able to parse that kind of information.
So thank you all in the audience for taking your lunch to join us today. Thank you to the speakers. I think it's obvious from their comments and things you all read and the hearings you all have attended that we're at the beginning of what will likely be a prolonged period of exciting innovation, and then of course the legislative and regulatory activity that will have to continue to be developed to keep up with the innovation. And again, I just can't thank you all enough for taking the time today to share your thoughts with us. And again, you all taking your lunch today to join us. So thank you so much.